So thank you very much. Thanks a lot for inviting me first to Ritsumeikan University. Thank you, Sato Sensei. Thank you, Yuko Sensei, and the rest of you that are over the Japanese colleague, but also my friend and colleague Dominique Mihalis and Professor Virginia Dazzani from other universities in Europe. This is a lucky coincidence to be all together here, and I think this has been also an additional value of my visiting in Japan. So sharing these experiences with dear colleagues and meeting you all. Tonight, I will give a lecture about one of the main topics I'm interested. I'm starting obsessed by borders and border-related issues already some years ago. And I will tonight, what I would like very much to do is telling you a story of me, myself. Sorry if it sounds like very narcissistic, but the best way to tell what I have done over the last years is also, it goes hand in hand with what I became in the last years while crossing some borders in my life that are becoming also my intellectual life. So you are gonna, let's say, listen to a story of a girl that was very local and then started moving some few steps, first steps internationally. And little by little, this was also an intellectual locomotion from a very local and very basic understanding of borders to something more abstract. I do hope to, let's say, to show through the slides I prepared and maybe through my own presentation, the little journey I have done in the last years. So the title of this presentation tonight is Bordering Processes from Cultural Psychology Perspective. I am cultural psychologist, let's say, applying cultural psychology framework to developmental and educational processes. I met Tatsuya Sato Sensei many years ago at Clark University first when he visited Jan Valsiner, who is our good mentor, let's say, our friend, our colleague, my mentor, the mentor of some of other colleagues here connected online. So we met there and we started to know your contribution, Sato Sensei, to the cultural psychology framework. The TIA today, at that time was the TEM model and today is the TIA model, is well known abroad. Many students, international students, all students living in many different countries, they use your model to understand some psychological processes. So it's an honor to me discussing tonight with you, being invited by you, knowing your great contribution, theoretically and methodologically, invaluable contribution to the field of cultural psychology. In my little, you know, work in the field of cultural psychology, I'm doing very much, what I'm trying to do is combining this complex conundrum of ideas that we call cultural psychology with the idea of bordering, or better to say with the idea of border in mind and society. So let's start my little, let's say, like my little presentation of what happened in the last 10, 12 years when I start, because Jan Valsiner, when I met first time this mysterious object called border. So this is what I'm going to do today. I will have three, let's say, argument topics to discuss with you, some premises, and then the cultural psychology of bordering processes, where I will introduce some conceptual element, and then I will end with a proposal. Maybe an embryonic one, but still in the making. So what are the premises? The premises is both personal and professional one. Let me tell you the story of this girl 2006 met first time Ian Balsiner, and at that time I was very local. I had no experiences abroad. I was a PhD, just finished my PhD student in Italy, at University of Salerno, that is still my university, as my home university. Then I was, let's say, searching for, at that time, of an experiences abroad. I was very much trying to get connected with some other university in Europe first, in UK also, but I had a lot of trouble. Then I met Jan first time, and I said to him, I would like, with my very, imprecise English at that time, that continued to be that way, say, yeah, I would love to have an experiences abroad. I'm just finishing my PhD. And he said, come. And then that year, because I had a very little grant, I crossed for the first time the one big border that was the ocean in between Italy and United States. At that time, I was working on the family school interaction. I did at that time a research investigating the meeting in between family and teachers when in Italy, they meet in person to discuss the performances, let's say, the achievements, the academic achievements of their children. So children are also invited to take part of this meeting. So it's a very complex social dynamics that happen in the school 2 or up to 3 times per year. And that was what I was working with. By coincidence, at that time was also the very same topic Virginia Dazzani, that today is with me here, was interested, and that was our point of connection, was what, let's say, connect each other, because the very same interest in the family school interaction. So we met there as well. I met Virginia, especially she's from Brazil. First time I met her in United States. And so we started discussing exactly of the border in between family and school. So that border was, that moment was the very first time in which I met the border. Was Jan suggesting me in one of the kitchen seminar, which is a meeting where people discuss new ideas. So at that time, what happened, I started thinking in terms of threshold, borders, frontiers, in between settings in which our life unfolds. So family school interaction was the object of my investigation, but then little by little, borders become the prominent one. And then I start my obsession. That was the initial point of my obsession. I get obsessed by this object that become part of my intellectual life, but for some reasons, it was also part of my personal life. At that time, I started traveling a lot more, and I started crossing many other borders and living in many different other places. Also, I experienced a lot of different crossing borders in my developmental processes, approaching new areas, starting new things that I have never thought before. So it was a journey. It was not an intellectual journey, but was also a personal journey. That's why I came out with the idea of we as a human being, we are constantly moving through borders in our developmental processes. So we cross one borders to reach another one, to move towards another one. And the entire human, let's say, trajectory, to me, as a developmental processes, might be defined in terms of crossing new borders again and again. So this is the premises of my, let's say, work. So I said that human activity, as I wrote here in the slide, the human activity take place on the border. between what already exists and that which could still come into being in the next moment. So this is the way in which I understand human developmental processes, living in between what we already know, what we already are, and the next moment in time. So this is the premises of my, let's say, intellectual journey. But as I said, I got obsessed by this very mysterious object that is called border. What a border is about? What is a border in itself? And starting from this question, many other questions came, follow it since then, and many of them are still unsolved, unresponded. I couldn't respond to the hundreds of questions that started, exploding in my mind since that time. So one was like, what is a border in itself? And some other important, let's say, direction I take from that starting point was how the border making and the border regulating processes phenomenon operate. And this leads to the complexity of the border processes in mind and society. First, I start answering the very basic question, what is a border in itself? When I start thinking of a border, to me was like nothing, was like, okay, let's see what a border is about. And then I discovered that there are so many features that you can, that through which you can describe a border. So borders, when you think about a border, something comes to your mind in terms of demarcation. So it's something that divides two things, two areas, two elements. So apparently it sounds extremely simple object. But then little by little, I start collecting around me, very phenomenologically, I should tell you, a lot of examples of borders. And my obsession become even more strong because everywhere I turn my face, I was like finding borders. So I collected some pictures here just for you to have an idea of in which direction I went when I start, let's say, the catalog of borders, let's say so, was first physical borders. So I found a lot of different borders in our ordinary life. And this one is a gate. Maybe it's simple to understand. It's a gate in between, let's say, a private house behind the gate, which is closed, and the urban areas where people can pass by, right? So we have those kind of devices, the border devices like gate, like doors, like windows. They are everywhere. They are very ubiquitous, and you may find in all around you. But if you put a bit of attention of the use of that's such a kind of borders, lots of interesting elements come up. For example, in order to cross this gate, in order to enter the space called house behind the gate, you should be the owner, or you should be an invited person by the owner, or you may cross the border, but you will be someone that is without permission, I think. I mean, if I am the owner, okay. If I am invited by the owner, fine. But there is the third way to cross this border. Just jumping out, climbing this gate if I want to stolen something into that house. So you see, there are many different ways to enter that space, that private space. And by the end of the story, the gate is something that is dividing public space from private space. Normal, when I pass by, when I am in the street, when I'm working on the sidewalk, other kind of, let's say, behavior, it's totally, I can take other form of behave when I am into that. So this simple crossing borders, the act of crossing the border also means new form of regulation of my behavior, new form of communication, new identity somehow, right? So this is not just a physical device, it is something more. It acquires some special, regulating function of me while crossing this border. From invited person, from an unknown person, from my the owner, when I am outside, to inside the space, and I can act differently. And this is one of the things, just for to give you some examples. There is another form of border that came to my mind. It was for a long time was part of my investigation. That was like the socio-political borders. So I went through social sciences and political sciences for a while, and I start, let's say, meeting people that came from human geography also. I studied quite a lot of international agreement. So I went through different disciplines in order to understand the role of borders in different areas of our life. And socio-political domain, borders are extremely important. And every day we get to know new wars, new conflicts, new, let's say, problems that comes from this violation of the borders or construction or new borders making processes. This is a funny picture of one of the most complex borders, politically speaking, in the world at that time, continue to be today, Mexico-USA borders. This, of course, is not anymore this way. There is a big, huge wall that divides Mexico from the United States. But again, I took this picture just for you to understand that the very centimeter where the border starts is not just a geographical location. There are regulation, there are sovereignty that are at play here. So a person that wants to cross this border, depending if you have a permission to cross that border because you are a worker moving from Mexico to United States, this means something. But if you are going and fro, there are people commuting legally or illegally every day, which is an issue, right? In all the borders everywhere, there are these border zones that where a lot of things happens, including economical, very important things. So again, this is a socio-political border. So I started also being obsessed by socio-political borders, and this was another phenomenological, collection I did of several borders in the world. I also understood at that time that borders are new borders are constructed every day. In the last decade, a lot. I don't remember exactly how many kilometers of new fences, walls have been constructed. So this is something which is becoming, let's say, a very critical elements, and there is no solution for that so far. Okay, so this was another kind of border I was collecting on the same line. This is another little example of borders here, invisible borders again. You see this little line in the middle of the Mediterranean. This is Sicily, is one of the islands next to my place. By the way, I'm living a bit further here. This is Italy, and this is the Mediterranean areas. So you see, this is the island that is located just in front of Africa. And so in the middle of the Mediterranean, we, as a human being, some time in the past, we decided that this is the line that divides Europe from Africa. And if you cross, it's invisible, of course, it's in the middle of the sea. There is no real line into the sea. But if you cross that borders, you are not just crossing, let's say, a border in between two states, but you are crossing a borders in between two continents. And there are a lot of people that are migrating, trying to reach Europe via Mediterranean Sea. And some of them, many of them, they are just dying in these waters because the legislation doesn't allow you to, let's say, legally move from Africa to reach Italy, of course, and Italy as well as Greek, etc. So this line is the very line from where you may become a tourist moving from one side to another for going to a cruiser, or an illegal migrant person that can be killed into the middle of the Mediterranean. So from our invention of a border in the middle of the sea, many, let's say, many things that derived. One of the consequences are thousands of people dying into that water. Okay, so borders are not just a fascinating research topic, but there are very serious consequences when it starts, looking at that from socio-political domain. This was one of, let's say, I work in this field. I start understanding some of those things, but then I move more to, again, back to psychological issues. And I start, let's say, looking at our interaction in everyday life, how we regulate, how we negotiate borders in our everyday experiences. This is a funny experiences in the elevator, maybe in some elevator more, in some other elevator, in some places you may find crowded elevators, and so you're trying to negotiate with another person in the elevator your space, your border, your physical border. You keep yourself safe, you do not touch another person, etc., etc. So there is some sort of dancing that all of us we do while we are in a crowded space to keep our border, let's say, or to negotiate our borders. Of course, depending on the level of intimacy that you have with the person, it might vary a lot, of course, right? Social distances or more intimate connection, etc., etc. So this is, to me, again, is a matter of border. And you may hear, I will not get offended if you start saying you are seriously obsessed, cara, dear Pina. You may do it, okay? So then again, I was not satisfied. I also understood that I didn't put the picture here, but I also understood at the time that border might be temporal. So not only physical, not only spatial, but also temporal. Let's say the starting of a football game, the end of the football game, 90 minutes in which two teams, they are fighting each other, right? There is the football championship going on at these days, so this is perfect. But in our social relationship, they are also in our mind. And this picture, it represents all sorts of rules or categories or moral categories that we have in our mind to regulate our behavior individually and collectively. I mean, like what I should do, what I can do, what I must do. And those things change over the time. So they are not the same when you are 15 years old. Your duty and your, what you feel like okay to do, what you feel like that I cannot do it, depends very much on the variation and the temporal component, the developmental processes, and the social context as well. So there are so many invisible, let's say, but powerful categories, borders that are categories, moral categories, regulation in our life, and also the way in which we set our mind, to me, is a form of bordering processes. So you see, I collected a lot of examples, and this collection of examples everywhere around me took quite a lot of time. And then I get sick and tired of that obsession. And I start moving to another level of analysis because, of course, I can see everywhere borders, and this is fine. But after a while, I felt like was unsatisfied by that. There was something that I need to do with all those collection. And what I did was starting analyzing the features of the borders a more general level, at more advanced level, let's say abstracted level. And I start first identifying some ambivalences. So first, yes, borders are ubiquitous, but also they are ambivalent. And the ambivalences comes from the very simple fact that they unify while dividing. So the very same borders, they operate in a way that connect and divide at the same times. And this is not a simple feature. This is not a trivial one. So if a border divide and connect, why in our mind prevails most of the time the division component and not the connecting one, okay? So borders are the connecting points also, not only the demarcating parts in between our mind and the rest of the world. So this, you see, borders implies the idea of separation and at the same time also the idea of point of connection. And depends very much on what we want to prevail. In the border case of Mexico and the United States, or in the social political domain, most of the time prevails the idea of disconnection, the demarcation, differentiation instead. But border might be also the place of pacification. And we really need to go this way. Then I didn't stop here. One of the features was like separating while unifying, but I start also reflecting on the way in which we create borders, or what is the bordering processes we follow. And now let me give you an example of what came up after a while. All this was always me struggling over the years with these little things. In the middle of many other things, this fil rouge was going, like, okay, let's think again and again about borders. And then I stopped it. And then I went back and say, no, there is something more. No, I have to do something more. So one day, thanks to Jan Valsinen once again, I met was a paper, and I will tell you which paper was in a few seconds. And in this paper, there were these circles. And I start reflecting, following, because I read that paper, how much this circle has to do with our bordering processes, the way in which we create borders, and what are the borders about. So I think all of us here, we are seeing on the screen a red circle. And if I ask you how many objects do you see, I'm sure almost all of us will say, with no doubt, this is only one object. But at the end of the story, is not only one object. Here we have a complex dynamic, which is made by three objects: the internal part, the border or boundary, they are synonymous, and the external part. So back to what I said, what I wrote here. So the internal part, there is the red line, and then the external part. If you follow me for a little while, you will see the complexity of the things. This is not my idea. This comes from this guy, Herbst, 1976. He came up with this idea of cogenetic logic, Herbst, 1976, cogenetic logic, that to me was like a sort of wow, my aha moment. When I found something that really helped me to scaffold my thinking about borders, because borders are, let's say, the border here is the very moment in which I create these triplets, internal boundary, external one. Let me explain a bit more. Those three aspects, they go together, they emerge together, they exist together, and they vanish together because the border. This is a triplet. So once I have a blank paper and I write on the paper a red circle, I'm not just creating one object, I'm creating a triplet because the border, so because this red circle. So the red circle is creating a triplet of what is inside the circle and what is outside the circle. So the border is a dialogical connection in between two areas. One is the closed set of borders, and here I can put everything I would like, which is not disconnected with the external world. So border, if I erase, cut it off, the triplet disappears. If I write it now, the partition appears again, but not only the object, but the triplets. So bordering processes is a very complex, dynamic process that implies many objects at the same time. The adjacent part and the borders, you see? So we have to give up. This was my aha moment. I realized that I was thinking monologically, that I was analyzing borders in a very simple manner. And looking at the borders, I was just looking at that specific reality, while that reality is not alone. That reality implies two more things. In this case, which is a very simple example of bordering processes, the inside, the border, and the outside. So each time I start analyzing a border, so from that point onwards, I assumed a more complex perspective, understanding that there are processes going on, not just a product, not just one object, but processes, bordering processes. Again, you see? Here again, this is another example, because when you have your aha moment in your intellectual life, then you cannot give up, then you cannot get back, right? You have to continue in this line of complexity somehow, right? It's a new level of analysis. Here in this slide, you see, again, another form of bordering, let's say separating the upper part of these slides. Here you see a vertical line that separates right and left part. Same story as before. It's not just one object. It's not just red line, vertical red line. Here, again, there is a triplet, left, border, right. So the two things, they are together because the border. Okay, so this is something, when you start thinking this way, you really see, the articulation of things all together. But then I start reflecting on the way in which we usually do in our, let's say, was not a sort of, let's say, insight. I took quite a lot of time. What I'm telling you, it's a story of 14 years on this little by little, adding little piece of my intellectual journey. So then I start reflecting, yes, of course, right, this is right, left, there is something in between, fine, but is this the way in which we as a human being, we operate in our mind? And I discovered by reading a lot of other things, by doing some research myself, empirical research myself, that if you want, I can also tell you, that we just not demarcate the reality around us, distinguish the reality around us this way, but we create hierarchical order. Hierarchical order. So if there is right and left, what we usually do in order to organize our, let's say, giving an order to our world, what we do, we immediately create some sort of, differentiation. So left and right become positive and negative, better and worst. So things are not always equal in our mind, but they acquire some additional component. So I start reflecting on this process of hierarchical organization through the border. Bordering process is not just a matter only of organizing the reality inside our mind and outside our mind, but also organizing hierarchically the reality inside my mind and outside my mind, giving some order. This is important, this is less important, this is come first, this is come later, this is good, this is worst. And this additional value is something very important, extremely important for our survival, to me. This is my conclusion. This is one of my conclusions. So why? Maybe just to give some spoiler, I will ended up by saying something more later on, but why? Because we really need to organize giving an order to our reality. Otherwise, everything sounds extremely confused, extremely chaotic. Giving order means giving priority, giving, first this first come and then the other one and then the other one. This is positive, this is negative. All those value addition on the border processes is important to give an order in our reality, the real world around us, but also in our mind. So meaning making, distinction making, and value adding are the three-step processes in bordering making and bordering negotiating. This is what I came out after a while. So we attribute meaning. We are meaning maker, compulsive meaning maker, following Jan Balsiner's definition as a human being. But this is the very first step. Then, from the meaning making processes, we make distinction. Okay, and then, as a third step, we adding values. And these three steps produce border. Okay, let me give you an example. Let's see, we are here doing participating in this talk. We are all professors, scholars, researchers in the world. So this is my meaning making processes, what we are doing here, what I'm doing here. And then I can start making distinction. Yes, but I am the lecturer and you are the audience. Okay. Oh, see. And then I can do the third step, which is value adding. You are better than me, right? So I have to be good enough to interest you. Okay, this is just a simple example, maybe not the most fitting one, for you to understand how we process this. What is the process we follow in our mind when we do borders? And when the borders are created, we put the borders from our mind, we project the borders into the world, and those borders start operating back on our mind, getting an autonomous life. We creating those borders. I create you, you control me. This is the way in which also Jan Balsner, in one of the fantastic papers I suggest you to read, wrote marvelously clear. I would never be so clear as Jan. So we create border and we projected border into the world, and those borders start operating on us. Let me give you an example, okay? By chance, just by coincidence, I have here a little calendar of 2026, and I have a lot of deadlines, as always we have, right? In the academic world, we have a lot of deadlines. We create deadlines. We say, I have to send to Sato Sensei my paper by, let's say, I'm inventing, right? I have to send my paper to Sato Sensei. There is a deadline, but I set my deadline, my internal deadline, by next week, by Monday next week. And then I create this temporal border and put on the calendar. And how I'm approaching this Monday, I start being anxious. So that border that I create and put on the calendar Monday as the day which I have to send my paper, it start operating on me, making pressure on me, I feel anxiety, anxious because, so this is another very stupid example. Maybe again not the most fitting one, but it's the way in which we operate. We create borders. Borders, even if apparently are very real, like mountains, rivers, those physical one become borders because our intentionality. So borders are always human products, always. Even if when we choose as a geographical border, a physical element, as a mountain, as a river, as a volcano, right? We attribute the role and the function of border. So borders are always human products. Humans agree on something and they become a border. Depends then from our intentionality. Let's move on. This was an additional step in my little intellectual journey. But then still I was thinking that, yeah, fine, I got something more. I understood something more, but it's not all the story. So what were at that time, what I understood that we desperately need to draw borders. This was my finding at that time. We as a human being must define and distinguish the world around us in order to understand it, or otherwise we get lost. By defining the world and distinguishing objects from each other, we create an understanding of the world. And as a consequences, but I will not go that way much tonight, new part world dynamics emerge with all psychological implication in regulating our relationship with a new set of circumstances. Because when we create a border, we create a partition within the big picture, right? So how we relate, or how those little parts are related with the big picture, right? This is another thing that I studied later on. At that time, that was those points where the final, let's say, reflection. Again, I was unsatisfied. So I was like, thinking and thinking and thinking again in the middle of other things. So borders became my lover over the years. I've official, let's say, other official commitments like teaching, etc., etc. But this was like my companion, intellectual friend over many, many years. So I started reflecting on what? On the, let's say, is border real? If I assume, I was assuming that border are not just one single things. What is that? So it's like a just simple line? No, maybe not. If I look at a close look at one border, you see that it's not just one, let's say, single line that they can cross from one instant to another one. I was starting thinking more in terms of border zone. So it's a zone that through which I go. So in order to move from one place to another one, in order to go from public area into the beautiful house that were behind the gate I mentioned at the beginning, I have to do something. I have to do some physical locomotion or mental locomotion. It's not just an instant crossing. It requires time. And if it requires time, most probably it's because there is an extensionality. So it's a border zone. And therefore, something that happens in the middle, right? So I start thinking more in terms of extension, more in terms of temporality, more in terms of borders, zone, areas, borderscape, if you like. And this is an abstract figures that let's say exemplify, let's say, what I was thinking, like, is not just one, maybe is more like an extended areas. If it is an extended areas, in order to cross this line, I took time and I need to do something in between. Okay, so I was very much, zooming at that time on the features of the border in itself. Not only how we create it, not only how to regulate our life, but let us look to what is a border in itself. So it's just one line, no, it's something more. If it's something more, it means that it requires some other elements that to be crossed. So again, my unsatisfaction was even more. And I start reflecting that if I want to cross this border, such a rigid one, as I was thinking, the way I was thinking, one line to another one, nobody will cross this line. They are too rigid. So I look at the biology and understand that a membrane around a cell acts like a border. And the membrane has a very nice features, which is the permeability. So a cell is a cell because the membrane. And the membrane is something that is permeable enough to allow some elements to go into the cell, nutritions, and some elements being eliminated from the cell, like the trash, something that doesn't serve, doesn't work anymore. So in order to survive, an organism needs some permeable border or semi-permeable borders. So biology told me a lot. And I start importing this idea also in our mind and the way in which we border the reality. So I said myself, Pina, what if the border you are thinking are not that rigid as you are thinking, but they are more permeable? Maybe you have to change completely your mindset and start thinking in terms of psychological membranes instead of border zone. Membranes, let's say, gives us more the idea of moving in, moving out in our psychological processes. And sometimes that membrane become a bit more rigid and we cannot allow elements coming in our mind or become, permeable enough to be in dialogue with reality. When it becomes extremely rigid, maybe some psychopathological aspects may come up. But now I'm not right there. I'm not there. So there maybe I need some help from psychoanalytic friends here on the screen. So I'm not there. I mean, I cannot say that borders if my psychological borders become too rigid, this may create some mental health problem. Or when it become too permeable, right? What I know that there is some tensionality. This idea of permeability, it also implies tensions, right? In order to things to move in and move out, borders might be semi-permeable, but also might keep some tension in between what is inside and what is outside. This is another thing that I'm still working on. Maybe at the end of the day of the lecture, I will show which is on my plate right now, because the journey continues, of course. So here, the picture on the screen tells the story of elements that come and cross this membrane, psychological membrane. So in order something to come into our mind or something to enter in our psychological world needs to cross some borders, and not all the thing goes in the same direction. We need to find the way to go into that, okay? Okay, maybe I will keep something. I will not take so much time, but you get the point here. Little by little, from one very, let's say, simple idea of border, which was like, what are borders around me, right? I start moving to what border is about, how we create borders, what are the borders function in our reality. how we create and regulate our world with these 3 steps. But then back to borders, again, I found new features: tensionality, permeability first, and many more. Now, in order to cross this border, each of us find different ways. I call these temporary building channel processes. Not all of us, let's say, during our development processes, we have the very same, we follow the very same path, but we find our own way to get somewhere, to achieve something, to solve some problems. And this idea of temporary building channel processes helps me to understand that we are not, let's say, we are unique in our developmental processes, even though there are some, let's say, border all of us we need to cross, moving from instance through, let's say, the school years, getting a job, getting married, divorced, etc., just thinking of very general steps in life. Not all of us, we go and we do the same. So all of us, each of us, we find our own ways. And those are semiotic channel processes in our developmental path. So this permeability also helps me to understand that we create our own ways to cross our borders. And there is not only one for all of us. And there's something that I need to develop it further. But one more thing that I was, again, my unsatisfaction continues and then continued, and then it helps me to, I will skip this part. I will go directly here to the final proposal. Otherwise, I took so much time. Back to my, after this, let's say, exploration of the borders and the features and the characteristics and everything, I was like ready to see if this border elaboration, border analysis I did were already present somehow in some of the scholars I liked the most. So I started rereading, reanalyzing our authors, very crucial, very important in my field, like developmental psychology, by using the lens of borders. So what I did, now I got some information about borders, fine, I did some analysis, but is this totally new? Or there are already seeds, there are already elements in the history of psychology that I could rediscover again, that can help me to move further. So what I did is going back to some theories and see if there are borders issues there. And I found elements extremely important in Baldwin, in Piaget, in Vygotsky, and in Brunner that can be understood under the light of bordering processes. Okay, so again, my nomadic experiences was going first in one direction, then in another direction. Now, because some other convergences and some other coincidences in my intellectual journey, I'm very much interested in history of psychology also. So I used my understanding of border to read again or reread Baldwin, Piaget, Vygotsky, and Brunner for Jant in developmental psychology. And I found something that they have in common. The idea, first and foremost, of transcendence, crossing the borders from one element to another one and to another one as the vector of their idea of the developmental processes. So I found, of course, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, I don't know. Maybe I wanted to find something to make them, let's say, even more interesting to me. So this idea of transcendence, this idea of moving through borders is very much, to me at least, in my reading, in Baldwin, in Piaget, in Vygotsky, and Brunner, but in which part of their theories? not in all of the theories, but in some specific points. In the Baldwin theories, he told about persisting imitation and organic selection. Baldwin was an important figure in the United States academia, and then he was, for some personal reason, just kicked it off. And he was the inspiration, by the way. Baldwin inspired Piaget theories, and Piaget acknowledged Baldwin. And you will see each sense. So Baldwin had a very huge production, but one of the things that I think is related to Baldwin is this idea of persisting imitation. Baldwin said that when we see something, we are observing a reality around us, of some old models, someone that is behaving in some way, we tend to imitate what we see. But this imitation is not just a copy and paste of what we have saw, but there is a new things coming into place, a little change. So human mind cannot, in any sense, never just copy and paste. We are not a scan. We can do similar thing, not the same thing. So in this little modification of the model, the little changes, and then another one, and then another one, we make new things, right? You cannot see the differences at that specific spot, but if you take the distance, you see over the time the differences from the model to the end. Of course, there is a lot of Darwinian influences in what Baldwin was saying, right? But to me, this thread, the idea of imitation from the limited understanding we always have about imitation. Imitation is not just copy, it's making differences. And so in a micro sense, in micro aspects, we are moving and we are transitioning, we are crossing, okay? So we never repeat the same. This is one very basic things in which I see this, moving ahead, transcendence, crossing borders in my own words. Then comes Piaget stage theories, and it's not me claiming that this way. Stage theories is not developmental. The very developmental component of Piaget theories is the accommodation and assimilation processes. Again, here you see the mind operating in solving the problem, the conflict, so the cognitive conflict I have with the reality that I cannot handle. So there is new things coming to me, new tasks, new problems, new objects, new event. And if I have, let's say, strategies and cognitive tools to dominate, already fine. Otherwise, I have to change my mind and create new cognitive structure. In these processes of assimilation and accommodation, both serves the equilibrium. I somehow move ahead, make changes, making some transitions, crossing some borders from one level to another one, from a level of complexity to another one. And this, again, is a new form of analyzing Piaget, which is not just this little box one by one that you know one by one, but there is this moving, constant moving that is the very, let's say, core issue of our developmental processes. Proximal development, Vygotsky main notions, even though it's not the main notion, it became very famous. Vygotsky dedicated 2 lines to zonoproximal development, and surprisingly become the very famous notion, Vygotskian notion. Vygotsky, they said a lot more. But the ZPD, the zonoproximal development, is a transition zone where you are not longer A and not yet B. And in these places, exactly in this range of uncertainty of crossing the borders, new forms may emerge. So if you are interested in developmental processes, you have to work on this part in between, this area in between. Not state A, no B, because those are not developmental. but the liminality, in my terms, the border areas are the generative one. So there, new things come up. And again, you see my idea of border comes into place once again. Last but not least is the idea of scaffolding provided by Brunner in 1976, when he was interested in the way in which kids solve at different ages, they solve the problem, and they solve the problem together with another person, right? So the idea of scaffolding is like devices, metaphorically speaking, around the person that is growing, is somehow a space in between things, what I do already, what I can do, and what I can do next. Thanks another person who is helping me at the right time with very few things, and then he or she leaves, right? Because scaffolding is not about just creating a cage, let's say, a sort of moment to help people, but the important part is to leave that cage, and helps people to be autonomously doing autonomously the tasks. So again, here I see in the scaffolding notions one more time this idea of something in between that happen, in between people that are operating to solve a problem, people that are both together busy with finding a solution, right? So again, there is something in between. There is these areas of uncertainty, of crossing, and I reframe all of those discussions with the notion of liminality, which relates with the idea of in-betweenness. So liminality is a very complex notion. We found the liminality notion already in anthropology. We imported this notion from anthropology, by the way. Turner was one of the best, one of the scholars that elaborated this notion. So I invited you to read something about Turner and rituals. But again, liminality is not just, let's say, it's something that it's a complex conceptual tool to understand what happens in between things and what is in between imagined state and actual one, and where we may find a lot of processes. So if you are really interested in understanding human reality, especially from developmental point of view, we really need to look at liminal phenomenon, where things are already in the making. They are not completed. They are not finished. They are in the process, right? Because there, borders are operating. We create borders, renegotiate borders, and when remake the borders, and where we renegotiate things. And these liminal areas are very promising in understanding processes, not products. So developmental processes or developmental component, that is what I'm interested in most, imply the idea of unfinishing things, of in-between things, of border things. And again, back to the beginning of my lecture, we live in a reality. We create borders and we cross the borders. We are constantly moving ahead through borders crossing and border regulating and border negotiating. So again, it's like what I am as a person, again, finding my next border, and where I am as a scholar, trying to understand is everything is in between things. So I'm not interested in A or B. I'm interested in the green zones, what are unfinished, what are in the making, what are in the process of changing all the time. There, there are the meaning-making process operating. There are the bordering process operating, and there's my curiosity goes. Thank you very much. I think I took even more time. Thanks for your, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions and comments.